Hi, I'm Stephen Van Tassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, glad to have you on board. I hope your week has gone well. I am kind of recovering from maybe a little bit of COVID exposure. Someone I know contracted COVID, and I was near them, so I wasn't feeling too good. So maybe I got what they have, or who knows. But nevertheless, I'm doing okay, just not 100%. I hope that you're going to be safe and well this winter season, especially as we're coming toward the holidays. So do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so you can be updated on future podcasts. Also, if you need to get in touch with me, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at Stephen at wildlifecontrolconsultant.com. While Stephen, Stephen, no V in there, so step, hen like the chicken, at wildlifecontrolconsultant.com. That's Stephen at wildlifecontrolconsultant.com. You can certainly use the other email if you wish at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That certainly works as well, but we'll be transitioning over to that new email. I'd love to hear from you. Ideas for new shows, perhaps criticisms, comments, suggestions. That would be great. Would be glad to have you. This week, I recently learned of a new publication that is out on bat houses. You may say, well, that shouldn't be anything too spectacular, but the reality is there has been a lot of work being done on trying to determine what makes a bat house attractive to occupying bats. Those of you that have ever used bat houses know that the vast majority of them, I mean probably super majority of them, just become locations for stinging insects or not even used at all. So researchers have been trying to figure out what are the best practices to encourage bats to occupy bat houses. And so this is something I'm basically summarizing the publication, not all of it, but certainly trying to give you the major highlights, because if you have clients who are interested in having bat houses installed, and I do hope you would encourage them to do that if you have a suitable location, I think that would be important to help encourage. We want bats around, we just don't want them inside people's houses. We want bats to stay in their own house and away from people's houses. So let me get this PowerPoint going, and we can talk about what some of those principles are. Well, according to the researchers, they basically divide all bat houses into three essential types. The first one is sort of a bat box. This is for bats that are not necessarily colony dwellers, but they may go into cracks and crevices around trees. And so this sort of bat house is designed for them. It's something small. They're not going to be large numbers, and it's something that's going to be suitable for them. The next size house is going to be what they call the mini condo. So it's basically for lots of bats, like maternity colonies, large, congregational type bats, and that is the mini condo. And of course, the condo is just a supersize of the mini condo. So you basically have 3 points. I suspect the vast majority of you out there are not going to be dealing with condos. All right, that's typically done by a university or researchers or someone who is extraordinarily passionate about bats. But certainly there's going to be some of your clients who may be interested in really trying to do something to help bats weather the storm. There's a lot of pressures on bats, of course, habitat loss, White nose syndrome is certainly a big one, predation, and so bats are really suffering a lot of stresses here. And so biologists are interested in how can we help them survive, because we need to have these important species as nighttime insect predators, and they're just good for the environment overall. So we're going to focus, of course, on the mini condo and the bat box, but the principles that they've concluded, and again, this is sort of living information, so it's basically the state-of-the-art information now, but in a year or two, the information may become more refined. So what are some of those general principles? Well, bats need specific microclimates. Now, that's just a fancy word saying how is the weather in where they're going to be living? How is the temperature going to be where they're living? And two things are needed by bats for them to have places to live. That is proper humidity and proper temperature. So if things are out of whack, they're not going to want to live there, or they will not survive there. And so we have to place our bat houses in locations where we can help ensure the proper temperature. We don't have as much control over the humidity, to be sure, because that's something ambient in the air, but the temperature is something we can certainly try to manage in terms of how much sun exposure that bat house is getting. Will determine whether it's going to be warm enough or whether it's going to be too hot. And because if it's too cold and too hot, it's going to be bad. So the researchers basically talked about how do you find a suitable site for a bat house. And what they said was at least three principles are important here, and that is that location where you're placing the bat house needs to be quiet. And that would be even places like things like lawnmowers. So it's not just simply ambient noise, maybe that highway that's nearby or a busy street, but even things that are going to be more intermittent, such as lawnmowers. You want to make sure that the bat house is placed in an area that is going to have as low noise as possible for that given location. So we're wanting a location that's quiet. So this is where you have to sort of interview your client and say, where, do you have small children? Are there, is there an industrial site nearby? Is there a busy road? Because it may not be busy the day you're there, right? So you want to think about, are there people going to be, is this going to be an area that's going to be frequently mowed? If you can put it in a part of the yard or property that isn't mowed as frequently, that would certainly be a benefit over an area that's mowed more regularly. Secondly, you want a place that's going to be relatively dark. Now, of course, in an urban area, that's going to be difficult. But the point is you want to try to, everything's relative to the location. So finding locations where you're not having a spotlight on it, right? That it's not just so illuminated it looks like downtown Vegas. So you want to try to find a bat house location where it's dark enough and that people aren't going to be likely to put up lighting there for their own needs, because you want to pick a spot that's going to have low human traffic, low human needs, where it's going to be dark for that bat. And then lastly, this surprised me actually, that is good air quality. So is it a location where maybe someone has a diesel truck? You probably wouldn't want to have a bat house near that. Or if there's going to be people burning wood stoves, or maybe having a cookout area. So you want to think about places where there's possibly going to be contaminants in the atmosphere, and you'd want to try to locate the bat house to try to minimize those particular issues. One thing that they did point out, and that is, you may have heard that some people like to take bat guano and smear that on the bat house as a way to encourage bats to occupy the location. The researchers said that they do not want people to do that because of the problem of white nose syndrome. Now, you may be familiar with white nose syndrome, you may have heard of it. It's a fungal infection. This poor bat here is infected with white nose, and it ultimately causes bats to die because it disrupts their hibernation, causing the burn up incredible fat resources that they need for the wintertime, and they ultimately starve to death. And so it is a very devastating disease, and we just recently got it here in my state of Montana. We got it, was confirmed a couple of years ago, if memory serves. And so this is a terrible, terrible event. We were hoping we might be able to avoid it because we're dry, but nevertheless, we have it here. And so because of white nose syndrome, there's actually concern that the small brown bat may be listed as an endangered species or a threatened species, but we're still waiting for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to make that determination. So the bottom line is for us is don't use guano because that may increase the spread of white nose syndrome to uninfected bats. So don't do that. Bats in heat. Bats need heat. So they don't create a nest like a mouse. So they rely on the ambient temperature of where they're roosting to give them, excuse me, the needed heat they need. Sorry. The needed heat they need to either raise young or to survive themselves. So as a rule, maternity colonies need higher temperatures than bachelor pads. So, as you know, female bats are the ones who take care of the young. Males are not assisting in rearing of young. So females need higher temperatures, and specifically the range is somewhere in the vicinity of 104 degrees to 107.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, obviously, bats aren't going to have that constant temperature all day long, but it can't get too cold, nor can it get much hotter than that, because if it gets too hot, bats can actually die. So this is one reason why bat houses aren't occupied, is that they're either too cold or they get too hot. And so this is certainly a problem with our bat houses. So therefore, how do we resolve that? Well, the goal is to build as large a bat house whenever possible. And large bat houses allow bats to thermoregulate. So not only does a larger bat house be able to collect more sunlight heat during the day and therefore maintain that heat during the nighttime, but also larger bat houses allow bats to go up and down to get the right temperature that they need, and in and out. Specifically for larger bat houses, there may be multiple chambers. So an exterior chamber that's closer to the outside of the bat house may be cooler than one, or hotter than one that's closer to the middle of the bat house in terms of insulation, because of the different chambers that may be in that bat house. So you're looking for multiple chambers, large bat houses that are both tall and deep, and that is going to encourage more bats to perhaps investigate that particular location to get the microclimates that they need. The other issue is that they're encouraging people not just to install one bat house, but actually to consider installing multiple bat houses that you can place at different angles, so therefore bats can have a primary location and then maybe a secondary location. In addition, by using bat houses and placing them in different places, you increase the odds that one of those bat houses is going to have the sufficient microclimate necessary to attract bats to live there. I mean, just think of the difference with one bat house facing this way and another bat house facing this way, sort of perpendicular to each other. They are not going to warm up to the same extent because they're not exposed to the sunlight in the same way. And that's kind of the idea there. Of course, you could also consider things like shading of your bat houses. So if you're putting a bat house out there for a couple of years, and you may find, well, we had a really hot day today, and you're looking at it, and it's like, boy, that got really hot up in that bat house, and no bats are occupying it. Well, maybe we need to think about shading that bat house at different times of the year. So it all depends on how much energy you want to put into and try to encourage bats to live there. So what are some of the bat houses that they recommend? Well, they recommend the Bat Conservation International 4-chamber nursery bat house. And so you can see the 4 chambers there. This is their image, of course. And so you can get the plans for this particular bat house from the BCI, the Bat Conservation International website. And so they want you to build bat houses, and this is certainly one that they want you that they recommend, and the research seems to suggest that this one is one of those that properly works. But again, it has 4 chambers so that bats can select which chamber is going to be most suitable for them. There's another one that they like, and this is called the multi-chambered rocket box. Notice how it surrounds a pole, has multiple chambers inside, so bats can then move up and down and then in and out to get different temperatures. And of course, because it is round, the one side of the bat house is going to be hotter than the back side of the bat house, depending on where the sun is. So again, bats can then move in depth to find cooler areas or warmer areas depending on their needs. And that's the philosophy behind this particular type of recommendation. So where should you mount your bat house? Well, they don't recommend mounting bat houses on trees for a couple of reasons. One, they tend not to get warm enough because of the shade, but secondly, it provides an easier way for predators to access the bat house, and they do not recommend that. They talk about how the importance, you need to be sure that the bat house doesn't allow climbing animals to access the bat houses, and even to prevent predators, like you may need to put bird spikes on the bat house to prevent raptors and other types of birds from standing on top of the bat house and then picking off bats as they're flying away. They do recommend putting bat houses on structures. I would only add, make sure if you're putting it on a structure, make sure you're putting it on a part of the structure that where people are not going to be lingering. It's not going to be near a walking area. You want to put it in a more remote part of the building. So, because you don't want that guano is going to be coming down and dropping to the ground. You don't want people to be having close access to that, as well as, their pets and children. So the advantage of putting it on a building, of course, is that the building is going to be a source of heat for that particular bat house as well. So either mounting it on a pole or mounting it on a building, just be sure that the client understands what they're kind of getting into when you're having them mounting it so close to a structure. How high should the bat house be placed? Well, the recommendation is that the exit should be at least 10 feet off the ground up to 16 feet. The rule is you want to make sure that the bat house is placed high enough off the ground so when the bat exits the bat house, a leaping predator such as a cat cannot snatch that bat out of the sky. And you also need to have it high enough to ensure that as the bat drops, he's getting sufficient speed or velocity to make sure that he can fly away from the given location to get on with his life. So where should you orient the bat house? And what they mean by this is, how do you orient the bat house in relationship to the sun? And so for maternity houses, as I said earlier, those have got to be warmer than the male or bachelor pad bat houses. And so in colder climates, you want that bat house facing east, so that way it can warm up faster during the morning. In hotter climates, you want to make sure that the bat house is not facing west because it's going to get too hot. Now, those are rules of thumb, but understand, one of the comments in the publication was there was a time, even in Canada, where temperatures were higher than what they were in Death Valley. Well, Death Valley, what is it, Nevada? So here we have a situation where something as far north as Canada was hotter than what it was in Death Valley. So even though this is a rule of thumb, you have to consider your location in your time. If you're in a heat wave summer, then you may need to provide some shade to your bat house. And just because you're in a more northerly latitude doesn't necessarily mean that your bat house is going to be cooler than one in a more southerly latitude, because it all depends on how much exposure to the sun that bat house is getting, what time of day that bat house is getting exposure, and what color do you make the bat house? Are you painting it black? In some cases, we may need to be thinking about painting the bat house white to try to reflect some of that sunlight. So this is where you're saying, well, Stephen, you're not really giving me definitive answers here. And that's the problem. And this publication is the best of the science as they have it now. But they're working on trying to refine this information by performing research and looking at how new information's coming in, because they have so many variables to consider. And so this will be refined. They're calling it a living document, which means it's going to be the best information they have at that particular time, but it's going to be frequently updated as new information comes to fore. So the point is, these principles need to be applied now. And this is the best of our knowledge at this point, because they're looking at bat houses that get occupied and bat houses that don't get occupied, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what's the difference? Why is this one being occupied and this one's not? And they're saying, all right, here are the things that we can discover. There may be other variables we don't know about, but this is this is the best of our knowledge at this given point. So what materials should you use to build your bat house? And they recommend, at least for the exterior portion of the bat house, it should be at least 1/2-inch exterior grade plywood. That's for durability purposes. On the interior, they recommend 3/8-inch plywood. Ideally, the plywood should be weathered. Always make sure that there are no chemicals, no chemically treated wood is being used, right? So nothing that's going to be pressure treated or anything like that. You want to be sure that there's no chemicals in the wood. Now, if you're using plywood, they recommend weathered, partly to make sure that that glue that's gassing off is not going to be a repellent to bats. So you want to use older wood if possible. If you have the ability to purchase or can afford cedar wood, they do recommend that because it is so durable, but they do note that it is more expensive than plywood. Once it's constructed, you want to seal all the seams to ensure a tight fit, and also that it's waterproof. Make sure it has a sufficient roof on the top so that it's going to be dry inside. When you're constructing it, if your interior wood that's used for the slats for the interior chambers, if it's not rough enough, then they encourage you to cut 1/16 deep grooves in it to allow places for the bats to grip, so they can roost inside. Well, we've covered a lot here. I do hope that you're interested in both installing bat houses and maybe building them to try to help your clients to become more bat friendly. Certainly we don't want them in houses, but this may be an add-on service that you could add with your bat control work. And to learn more, you can find this particular publication called Best Management Practices for the Use of Bat Houses in the U.S. and Canada. And it is a publication produced by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and a Canadian wildlife group up there as well. So it's a government publication, and it has a wealth of information for you, and it gets even more into the details. But this is sort of the kind of the highlights in terms of what type of a bat house you're going to need to use, how to install it and place it in that environment. We do need to give bats a helping hand because they are under tremendous pressure. Well, lastly, of course, this is how you can get a hold of me. There's my email address at Stephen@wildlifecontrolconsultant.com. Hope to hear from you. If you can visit my website, of course, there's going to be publications and things there. And hopefully you're going to subscribe to the podcast. We'd love to have you join. If you don't like YouTube, you can also download my podcast from Rumble. We'd be glad to have you on board with that. We'd love to have new ideas for shows if you like, or perhaps you want to reach out for a consultation or whatever the case may be. We'd love to hear from you. Again, you can reach me at Stephen@wildlifecontrolconsultant. And then lastly, we call ourselves Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Be careful out there. Take care, everyone.